It really is.
On one hand, you hear constantly about the high-tech sector. AI breakthroughs, innovation, the market hitting new peaks. The digital economy seems to be absolutely booming.
Right.
But then you look at the other side, at the foundational economy, the one that's based on actual human physical labor, and it feels like it's shrinking, almost vanishing right under our feet.
It's a profound split. I'd even call it jarring. And it's creating this massive conflict right at the heart of the American story, as you said.
A conflict how?
Well, you've got the digital future, right? It's charging ahead, it's fueled by software, by capital.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you have the absolutely essential human labor economy.
The one that actually makes things work.
Exactly. The one that keeps our crops picked, our shelves full, our houses built. That engine is colliding, and I mean head on, with a really aggressive new wave of immigration policy.
A policy designed for mass deportation.
For a large-scale mass deportation. So we're literally watching one system actively dismantle the inputs for the other. It's a fascinating, if worrying, economic experiment.
And I think that's the question we really want to tackle in this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
What is the immediate quantifiable cost of that collision?
Yeah.
We're not talking about, projections for 10 years from now. We're talking about present-day losses that are already adding up to hundreds of billions of dollars.
Precisely. Our mission today is to dive into a whole stack of recent economic briefings, some analyst reports from places like S&P Global, the Dallas Fed, and really just follow the money.
Follow the money, both the money being lost and the money being made.
Yes, both the immense wealth that's being lost to this contraction and the very specific wealth that's being gained by the people who profit from containment. We want to find the economic footprint of this policy choice.
Okay, so to do that, we've structured this deep dive into three interconnected layers. They sort of explain the full trade-off.
Right.
First, we're going macro. We're looking at the big national problem, which analysts are urgently calling the GDP gap, the big picture of lost growth.
Then we're going to zoom in.
Exactly. We'll go micro and look at the visible consequences on Main Street, the collapse of what you've termed the shadow economy.
And finally, we track the money directly to the winners in this crisis.
The booming infrastructure of what's being called the icy tech boom.
Understanding that flow of resources from lost workers to private corporate profits is absolutely central. It's how we grasp the true economic identity of the country in 2026. This is where you learn why everything from the cost of a new house to the price of lettuce is changing right now.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the biggest picture of all, the national GDP.
Right, the GDP. It always sounds like this, this abstract number you read about in the business pages.
Yeah, something for economists to worry about.
But it's fundamentally the speedometer of the economy.
Yeah.
It measures everything we produce, everything we sell. It's the health check.
And we've been hearing a lot of chatter lately about a projected 2% growth for this year. And historically, if you told someone you're getting 2% growth, that was seen as pretty good, steady, healthy, responsible.
Sure, stable.
But now, in 2026, analysts are treating that same 2% figure not as a success, but as a huge warning sign. Why? The sudden shift. Why is 2% now being called a gap?
The pessimism, it all stems from measuring what we're doing against what the economy could be doing.
Okay.
We need to bring in this concept of potential GDP. The easiest way to think of it is like this. Your car might be driving smoothly at, say, 60 miles an hour.
Okay.
But if that car was designed and built to handle 100 miles per hour, then 60 is actually a sign of underperformance. You're not using the engine's full capacity.
So potential GDP is that 100 miles per hour.
It's the maximum.
It's the maximum amount the economy can produce when all its resources, land, capital, and crucially, labor, are running at full efficient capacity. Right now, our potential is much, much higher than 2%, but we are driving straight into a massive labor shortage wall that's stopping us from ever reaching that top speed.
But that feels so counterintuitive to a lot of people, I think, because they'll look at the official unemployment rate, which is what, sitting around 4.3%?
About that, yeah.
And they think, well, hold on, the economy isn't at full employment. There are still people looking for work. So how can we have labor shortages and at the same time have unemployed workers available?
It's purely a result of two different dynamics crashing into each other, demographics and policy.
Okay, break that down for us.
First, the demographic reality is it's just overwhelming. We are currently watching the single largest generation in American history, the baby boomers.
Born between 46 and 64.
Right. We're watching them exit the workforce. And to put a really fine point on it, by the end of this decade, every single member of that enormous group will be over the age of 65. They are retiring in staggering numbers.
So they're emptying out huge sectors of the economy that require, deep institutional knowledge or very specialized hands-on skills.
They're leaving massive specialized holes. Think about the sectors being hit the hardest right now. It's elder care, it's nursing, long-haul trucking, specialized manufacturing.
The trades.
And critical trade industries like plumbing and electrical work, absolutely. These are not fields where you can just, train a 20-year-old replacement overnight. It takes years, decades sometimes.
And traditionally, what was the mechanism? What did the U.S. economy always use to sort of smooth out these demographic bumps?
It has always been immigration. For its entire history, the U.S. has relied on a sustained, net, positive flow of immigration to fill those exact holes.
To bring in younger workers.
Younger workers who pay taxes, who start families, who provide labor, it effectively balances the labor market pyramid and supports the entire social security system. But, and this is the key, due to the new aggressive deportation policies we're seeing now.
The ones aimed at mass removal.
Right. Because of those, net immigration is now tracking close to zero. In some quarters, analysts are even saying it's dipping into the negative.
So it's a double squeeze. You've got the boomers leaving the labor force through retirement in record numbers.
A massive outflow.
And at the same time, the traditional replacement mechanism, new migration, is being actively shut down, blocked off.
That is the labor wall.
Yeah.
The labor supply is fundamentally shrinking, and it doesn't matter what the official unemployment rate is because the number of people who are willing and able to work in these specific necessary physical sectors is just declining fast.
And this brings us back to that simple formula for growth.
It brings us back to the basic economic physics of it all. You can simplify the growth formula pretty significantly. It's basically GDP is approximately labor times productivity.
So GDP equals L times P.
Roughly.
Okay, before we jump to the conclusion, walk us through the consequence of that. If the labor part of the equation is shrinking, what does that force the P productivity to do just to keep growth stable?
Well, it means that if your labor force shrinks, you only have one way to maintain that stable, historical 2.8 or 3% growth rate.
Which is?
Your productivity has to work exponentially harder. You need every single remaining worker, whether they're in an office or on a construction site, to produce vastly more per hour to make up for the millions of people who are now just missing from the workforce.
And this is where a lot of people will bring up technology, right? We hear about AI and automation boosting productivity constantly, especially in high-tech fields. Isn't that supposed to be doing the job? Isn't technology stepping in to solve the demographic problem?
And it's a fair question. AI is certainly boosting productivity in offices, in information services, and logistics management, no doubt about it. But remember what we're talking about here.
The physical, hands-on labor economy.
The physical economy. The technology is just not advanced enough yet, or it's way too expensive, in the specific areas where the boomers are retiring and where immigrant labor has historically been dominant.
Can you give us a hard distinction there? Why can't an AI just do these jobs efficiently yet?
It boils down to two things, really. Capital expenditure, or CapEx, and unstructured environments.
Meaning the cost to buy the robot is too high.
Exactly. For something like farm automation, these highly specialized robots for picking delicate crops like strawberries, the CapEx is still prohibitively expensive compared to the cost of human farm labor.
And what about the unstructured environments?
Think about a restaurant kitchen, washing dishes, or a construction site. These are messy, chaotic, unstructured places. An AI-driven robot might be incredible on a predictable assembly line.
Where everything is in the same place every time.
Always. But asking it to frame a uniquely structured house or sort dishes in a constantly changing industrial kitchen, it's currently an economic failure. The physical human labor gap is still a physical human problem. We are years, maybe even decades, away from technology truly replacing those millions of missing hands.
So the GDP gap we started with is literally that difference. It's the gap between potential GDP, what we could be generating if we had the labor, and the stunted GDP we're actually producing because that labor is physically gone.
That is the definition of the gap. And the quantitative loss is startling. S&P Global recently put out projections showing that growth is slowing dramatically. It's down to 2.0% this year. That's a sharp reduction from the 2.8% analysts were expecting just a couple of years ago.
That 0.8% difference, it sounds so tiny to the average person. It sounds like a rounding error in an economy this massive.
And I get why it sounds like that, but that 0.8% is the difference between a country that's coasting and a country operating at its maximum speed. In an economy the size of the U.S., that seemingly small 0.8% represents hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions?
Hundreds of billions of dollars in lost goods and services every single year. That's wealth that isn't being created, houses that are not being built, services that are not being provided.
Can you put that number into perspective?
That loss is roughly equivalent to the entire annual GDP of a medium-sized European country, like Portugal or Greece. It's not a rounding error. It's a massive anchor on our national growth.
And this is where that huge abstract macro number connects directly to everyday life, to the grocery store, to the housing market.
Absolutely.
When we talk about lost goods and services, what we're really talking about is inflation in key sectors.
Exactly. Let's take the construction sector. It relies incredibly heavily on immigrant labor, both documented and undocumented.
Right.
When a construction company can't find the necessary human labor, the framers, the roofers, the site crews, they are forced to take on fewer projects. It's that simple.
So the supply of new homes goes down.
Supply goes down, demand stays high, and the price of a new home inevitably rises. It doesn't matter what the interest rates are doing. We're going through this massive demographic shock where the human component of the cost of everything, from healthcare to basic produce, is rising rapidly.
So the loss of immigrant labor is fueling inflation directly.
It is, because the cost of the labor we can find is escalating exponentially to try and attract the few available workers.
We're all feeling the pressure because there just aren't enough hands to do that foundational work anymore. The overall GDP deficit, this massive problem, it really starts with the missing cook, the missing framer, the missing elder care worker.
That's the crucial transition point. The national sort of theoretical deficit, it translates into very real, very painful, hyper-local economic collapse. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the national GDP problem starts with small businesses closing in your neighborhood.
Let's move to that micro view then. To the severe contraction that's happening right now on Main Street with the collapse of the shadow economy.
Yes.
The scale of enforcement we're seeing now is just, it's unprecedented. The administration is aiming to deport nearly 1 million people every year.
It's a staggering logistical operation.
And it's targeted directly at the economy you've labeled the shadow economy. First, why that specific term? What does it mean?
We call it the shadow economy because for decades, a lot of the financial activity from undocumented workers and entrepreneurs, it happened largely outside of official government data. It wasn't fully regulated. It wasn't accurately measured by the Census or the Labor Bureau.
So it was invisible to the official numbers.
To a large extent, yes. But that said, it was entirely real. It functioned as the absolute heartbeat of local working-class communities all across the country. These are the millions of individuals who, despite their status, aren't just laborers. They're essential cogs in the local machine. They pay sales tax, they rent property, they generate commerce.
And the scale of removal, 1 million people a year, is something we really need to get our heads around to understand the shock.
We do. To put that in perspective for you, that's roughly equivalent to removing the entire population of a major U.S. city. Think Austin, Texas, or San Jose, California.
The entire city, just gone from the national economic system.
Every 12 months. It is an immediate cataclysmic shock to the local economy, especially in states with big agricultural, service, and construction sectors.
And this isn't just about losing employees, which I think is the easiest part for people to visualize. A huge percentage of this population are also business owners. They're entrepreneurs. They're creating wealth.
Absolutely. We have focused so much on the manual labor component, the farm workers, the housekeeping staff, that we often just overlook the incredible entrepreneurial spirit here.
And the numbers back that up.
Current estimates suggest there are about 1.1 million undocumented entrepreneurs operating in the U.S. They run the essential small businesses in your neighborhood.
Like what?
The gas stations, the independent mechanics, the dry cleaners, the small ethnic grocery stores that serve very specific community needs. These are essential everyday services.
And what happens when an owner is removed through deportation? I mean, they can't just pass the business on to a successor or sell it off to get the value out of it.
That's the tragedy of it. The wealth is just vaporized. It's a total, unrecoverable collapse of local wealth.
How so?
Well, when an undocumented entrepreneur is removed, their business, which was often informal or relied heavily on community trust, maybe didn't have a formal succession plan. It just disappears overnight.
And the jobs they created.
The jobs they created for others, and many of those employees might be U.S. citizens or legal residents, they vanish instantly. And that leads directly to this profound demultiplier effect that just infects the entire local supply chain.
Okay, walk us through that demultiplier effect in detail, because it really illustrates why this is such a, well, a self-inflicted economic wound.
Okay, think about a vibrant local community, maybe a small commercial strip mall that's centered around these essential small businesses.
Sure.
Let's use a very granular example. Let's say there's a small family-owned landscaping business. The owner, the core crew, they're undocumented, they get removed, that business closes immediately.
Okay, step one.
Step two, the local hardware store and the nursery, who relied on that landscaping business as a bulk buyer for all their supplies, they just lost a massive client. So they're forced to lay off a few of their own US-born employees because their revenue just dropped off a cliff.
Step three.
The landlord who leased the small warehouse to the landscaping business now has a vacancy. And if this happens to a few businesses in the area, the commercial property values start to fall because of high turnover.
And step four is the wider community.
And fourth, and most broadly, the immediate community. The homeowners who used that service, the people who ate at the little deli next door that used to cater the cruise lunch, they now face a reduction in services and commerce. The whole area becomes less vibrant.
So the contraction is geometric. It's not one person leaving. It's 4 or 5 local economic functions just stopping all at once. It's lost human capital, lost stability, lost infrastructure.
We are, and we can start to quantify that financial drain just in terms of lost revenue and purchasing power. Even if we only focus on tax revenue, the non-documented population contributes billions.
Billions.
For instance, just in Washington, D.C. alone, that population contributes over $73 million in local taxes. When they're removed, that revenue stream just evaporates instantly.
And when analysts scale that up to the national level, what's the cost in terms of consumer demand and purchasing power being removed from the economy?
The estimates are, they're staggering and frankly alarming. We are talking about $300 billion in annual purchasing power.
$300 billion.
That's being literally sucked out of the economy nationwide. This is the consumer spending that fuels the local businesses that are still there. It's the foot traffic, the car payments, the local investment.
And when that much cash disappears,
You see the immediate, tangible impact in the labor stats. Private sector employment in states with high enforcement levels, particularly in those agricultural and construction hubs, has already dropped by nearly 3% in just the last few months.
wait, a 3% contraction across the private sector is massive. That's not a slow cyclical trend. That's a sudden policy-driven shockwave.
It is a shockwave.
But I have to ask, that $300 billion figure, it's based on economic activity that was, by definition, informal or shadow. How do analysts account for that? Isn't that number potentially an overestimation?
That's a really important distinction to make, and it's a fair question. The economists' models, they account for it by using consumption data and remittance flows, not formal payroll records.
So they're not tracking hidden income.
They're not trying to track the income that was hidden. They're tracking the spending that was visible. These individuals still buy food, they pay rent, they buy clothes, they use services. That $300 billion figure is based on proven consumer spending patterns, regardless of how the income was declared. When those consumers are gone, that money is gone from U.S. businesses.
That clarifies it. It's a measure of lost demand, not necessarily lost taxable income. And the severity of this shock, you said, is being compared to some of the most difficult periods in recent memory.
It is. Economists at the Dallas Federal Reserve, in their analysis of this unique economic shock, they made a very pointed and sober comparison.
Which was?
They stated that the immediate disruption felt across these highly affected local communities in terms of business closures, job losses across the supply chain is comparable to the economic disruption felt during the Great Recession of 2008-2009.
Wow, that's a heavy comparison. What specific metrics are they using to draw a parallel to the Great Recession, which was driven by a financial catastrophe?
They're looking at the velocity of small business payroll decline and the rapid spike in commercial vacancies in specific zip codes. During the Great Recession, liquidity dried up, and that led to a slow bleed of jobs. Here, we see jobs just evaporating almost instantly because of the forced removal of the workforce.
So the cause is different, policy, not finance, but the effect on Main Street is the same.
The effect on Main Street business stability is similarly catastrophic.
And we also need to touch on something you mentioned earlier, the warping effect that this massive redirection of government resources has on other critical functions.
It absolutely warps the entire system. When you dedicate massive resources, personnel, and attention to a single goal, deportation enforcement, facility oversight, other critical government functions suffer deep neglect.
What kind of neglect?
We're starting to see reports of issues like fraud tourism popping up in some states. This means people are exploiting social services, filing fraudulent claims because the usual oversight and vetting personnel who manage the system and monitor the books.
They're all busy with enforcement.
They're being diverted toward enforcement activities. And that leaves a vacuum of accountability elsewhere in the system.
It's the cost of distraction.
Yeah.
The system is so focused on building walls that it's failing to maintain the structures that are already in place.
Precisely. It shows how profoundly the shift in priorities warps the entire bureaucratic and financial system.
So if our national GDP is losing hundreds of billions in potential growth, and local small businesses are closing at rates that feel like a recession, someone has to be winning this financial transaction.
There's always a winner.
We're losing the shadow economy, and it's $300 billion in purchasing power.
So we need to follow that money flow to the other side of the ledger. Let's look at the financial explosion being driven by the demand for containment.
Let's follow the money to the detention economy and the ICE tech boom.
Right.
The juxtaposition here it's striking. It's almost cynical. On one hand, you have massive economic contraction and hardship, all driven by policy. And on the other, you have massive, record-breaking profit, driven by the execution of that exact same policy. We're watching the simultaneous collapse of one industry and the explosion of another.
The ICE tech boom.
Exactly.
If you follow the money, the picture becomes starkly clear. While that productive spending shadow economy is dissolving, the detention economy is exploding in size and scope to meet the new government-mandated demand.
And the winners are pretty clear.
Oh, they're unambiguous. Companies like CoreCivic and GEO Group, the absolute giants of the private prison industry, are reporting record-breaking profits. And it's driven entirely by this new enforcement regime.
Give us the scale of that windfall. What kind of quarterly revenue are we talking about from these companies?
We're talking about colossal figures. CoreCivic, for example, reported over $538 million in revenue for a single quarter.
$500 million in 3 months.
And this is not just a steady income stream. This is growth that's being fueled by what the corporate leaders themselves are calling a pivotal moment in their business model. And it's directly tied to the expansion of border enforcement and interior removal operations.
And we have to clarify here, this is no longer just about building rudimentary jails or holding people in a facility. The term you use, ICE tech, it suggests something much more sophisticated. A comprehensive infrastructure.
Absolutely. That's why the old term private prison is really insufficient now. ICE tech refers to the entire highly digitized, high-tech infrastructure of removal.
It's not just the buildings.
It's not just about building facilities, it's about the underlying systems you need to process, locate, and move 1 million people a year. This includes massive biometric tracking systems for identification, high-tech surveillance used for monitoring and locating people,
And transport.
and, critically, the specialized transportation services you need to move a population the size of San Jose across the country or out of the country every 12 months.
The logistics of removing 1 million people annually must be immense. And they require specialized, outsourced providers who can handle ground and air transport at a moment's notice.
They do. And this has created these incredibly lucrative, high-margin niches. Look at GU Group, for example. They own a specialized subsidiary called GTI.
Geo Transport, Inc.
Right. And GTI is responsible for handling the extremely complex ground and air transportation logistics for ICE. They're expecting a significant and immediate windfall from this new enforcement push.
How much?
They're anticipating an extra $50 million a year in pure revenue, just from removal flights alone, just from shuttling detainees between facilities or out of the country.
That $50 million and the hundreds of millions in revenue from the parent companies, that's a direct cost to the taxpayer, right?
Yeah.
The public investment to build this containment infrastructure must be staggering.
It is. When you look at the recent budget bill that passed Congress, the government allocated a stunning $150 billion.
$150 billion.
Dedicated specifically to this deportation agenda over the next 4 years. That is the cost of building this new infrastructure of containment, surveillance, and removal.
That's a figure that's almost hard to visualize.
And that is what this financial transaction ultimately boils down to. It is a massive pre-funded transfer of public taxpayer money directly into the coffers of private corporations. It's a corporate pipeline guaranteed by government contract.
So it's capital that's being explicitly redirected.
Explicitly redirected away from things like social services, education, or productive economic infrastructure. And instead, it's being spent entirely on an infrastructure of containment and removal.
And this leads us directly to the core ethical and financial problem that has always plagued the private detention industry, but it's massively amplified now.
The bed mandate.
The bed mandate. When a company's profit is tied contractually to the number of people they're holding, what possible incentive is left to ensure those people are processed quickly, efficiently, or even humanely?
That is the single most crucial question. And it moves the conversation from ethics to structural economics. The system is designed to financially incentivize inefficiency. These companies operate under contracts that often include something called guaranteed minimum occupancy clauses.
Okay, explain the GMO clause for us.
If the government signs a contract guaranteeing payment for, let's say, 30,000 beds, the contract mandates that the government pays for those 30,000 beds whether they are filled or not.
Okay.
However, the company maximizes its profit by keeping occupancy high because they get a daily per diem rate for every single occupied bed, a rate that covers much more than just basic costs.
So the company has every incentive to make sure those 30,000 beds are full.
And perhaps that the processing is not too fast, thereby sustaining longer lengths of stay. Their business model relies on high occupancy and sustained revenue streams tied directly to the detention population. The focus shifts entirely from public service, which should be rapid, fair, efficient processing, to maximizing shareholder return by ensuring a steady flow of detainees.
So the company is financially penalized, or at least operating below its potential revenue, if they process people too quickly or if enforcement drops. This turns a humanitarian crisis into a secure revenue pipeline for investors.
Precisely. It's a perverse incentive built directly into the taxpayer-funded contract. And we are seeing that incentive driving rapid physical expansion right now. They aren't waiting to break ground on new facilities. They're maximizing their existing assets and reactivating old ones.
You mentioned idle facilities. These are prisons that were previously closed because of a lack of demand.
Correct. We're seeing what are called idle facilities.
Right.
Prisons that were shut down years ago because of changing crime rates or lack of local demand, or they were just too costly to run, being reactivated.
It's infill.
And being filled quickly, in many cases repurposed for family detention. A specific and stark example is the massive facility in Dilley, Texas. It has over 2,400 beds. It was recently reopened specifically to meet this skyrocketing demand from the new enforcement policies.
And the corporate sentiment, from what they tell their shareholders, it reflects this as an opportunity for major financial growth.
The CEOs are remarkably transparent with their investors. One executive, speaking to shareholders, described this current period as a pivotal moment for the industry.
The pivotal moment.
Claiming that they are rising to meet demand. But again, that demand is not driven by typical consumer or market forces. It's driven entirely by policy choices that result in the forced removal and containment of millions of people. It's a policy-driven profit machine.
Let's bring the whole picture together now with a final economic trade-off summary.
The analysis is, it's straightforward, but it's profound. And it really defines the American economic story right now. The business model is fundamentally shifting.
Shifting from what to what?
The previous traditional economic model was based on profiting from what people produce, from growth, from services rendered, from innovation, from expansion.
And the new model, the model we're funding now.
The new model is based on profiting from how we contain or remove people. It is inherently contractionary, not expansionary.
So what's the final calculation of the trade-off?
The final calculation is stark. We are essentially trading a $300 billion shadow economy of active workers, consumers, and spenders, which drove local growth and provided essential, hard-to-automate labor for a guaranteed $150 billion detention economy made up of security guards, tech contracts, and containment infrastructure.
One system builds neighborhoods.
One system builds neighborhoods and adds to the GDP numerator. The other builds walls and adds to the public debt. And we are paying dearly for that contraction.
It's a heavy comparison, but a necessary one to truly understand the economic identity of the country in 2026. This shift has immediate financial consequences.
It does.
So to recap, we've covered the GDP gap. That 0.8% difference that sounds small but translates into hundreds of billions of dollars in missed economic opportunity, largely because the labor force is shrinking from retirements and intentional policy choices.
And we've seen how the absence of that $300 billion shadow economy is now being felt acutely by every small business owner and every consumer. It's creating recession-level shockwaves on Main Street because of the sudden removal of essential labor and purchasing power. The GDP gap is the visible sign of a country intentionally altering its economic foundation.
And finally, we identified exactly where the money is going, into a burgeoning ICE tech industry that's leveraging a massive $150 billion taxpayer investment to create a profitable, digitized infrastructure focused on detention and removal.
A system where efficiency is actually financially discouraged by the very structure of the contracts.
This deep dive really shows that the economic consequences of these policies are not theoretical. They are immediate, they are quantifiable, and they are shifting the fundamental way business is done in America.
It forces you to reflect on the fundamental trade-off we're making as a society. It's a decision that has a very clear dollar cost associated with it.
Reflect on this. The economy is no longer purely driven by expansion and labor. It is now partly defined by the immense cost and the lucrative infrastructure of forced contraction. What does it mean when the fastest growing sector of your economy is the one dedicated to removing participants from other sectors? That is a dynamic that will shape political and economic choices for decades to come.
It's vital knowledge for navigating this new economic reality and for understanding the true forces that are driving costs and prices in your own community.
Thank you for walking us through these complex, interconnected layers. And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We've included several resources in the show notes, including a detailed analysis of the CoreCivic and GEO Group financial windfalls and the latest S&P Global GDP projections. We hope this knowledge helps you stay well informed.